Picture this. You're the most advanced civilization in the galaxy. Your empire spans 1,000 star systems. Your technology can crack planets like eggs, and your fleets blot out suns. For 10,000 years, you've conquered every species you've encountered with ruthless efficiency. Then you capture one primitive bipedal creature from a backwater planet called Earth. Just one. And in 72 hours, that single human, a truck driver from Texas named Jake Morrison, will teach you why his species doesn't just survive in a universe trying to kill them. They thrive in it. The Zephyrian Empire thought they were capturing a specimen for study. What they actually did was invite an apex predator into their carefully controlled environment.
Because while they spent millennia perfecting the art of domination through superior technology, humans spent their entire existence perfecting something far more dangerous, the art of refusing to stay down. This is the story of how the galaxy's most feared empire learned that there's a difference between a species that evolved to conquer and a species that evolved to endure.
Between beings who rule through strength and beings who win through sheer bloody-minded stubbornness. They thought they caught a mouse. They caught a honey badger. And honey badgers, as Jake Morrison is about to demonstrate, really don't give a damn about your galactic empire. Jake Morrison had been having a perfectly normal Tuesday morning when the sky opened up and ruined everything. He'd been hauling a load of auto parts from Dallas to Houston, nursing his third cup of truck stop coffee and singing along badly to classic rock, when something that looked like a chrome cathedral descended from the clouds and swallowed his 18-wheeler whole. The last thing he remembered before the world went white was thinking that his insurance definitely wasn't going to cover this. When consciousness crept back like a hangover in reverse, Jake found himself in what could only be described as a fishbowl designed by someone who'd never seen a fish. The walls curved impossibly, made of some transparent material that seemed to bend light around itself. Beyond them, strange figures moved in the blue-tinted gloom, their forms distorted by the alien geometry of his prison. Jake sat up slowly, taking inventory. No broken bones, no obvious injuries. Still wearing his Wrangler jeans, work boots, and the faded Metallica t-shirt his ex-wife had tried to throw away 12 times. His wallet was still in his back pocket, along with his phone, though the screen now showed nothing but static. "Well," he said to nobody in particular, his Texas drawl echoing strangely in the curved space, "this is new. The fishbowl cell," he corrected himself, "was about 15 feet across and 10 feet high. No visible door, no obvious way in or out. The floor felt solid enough under his boots, but when he knelt down and rapped his knuckles against it, the sound was all wrong, like knocking on water that had forgotten how to be wet. Beyond the transparent walls, the aliens were having what looked like a very animated discussion. Jake had seen enough science fiction movies to recognize an argument when he saw one, even when the participants looked like 7-foot-tall praying mantises that had gone to law school. They gestured with too many arms, their triangular heads bobbing in patterns that probably meant something important. One of them, the biggest one, with what looked like rank insignia crawling across its carapace, pointed at Jake. Even through the distortion of his prison walls, Jake could see its compound eyes focusing on him with the intensity of a scientist examining a particularly interesting bacteria culture.
"Yeah. Well, howdy to you too,"
Jake muttered, giving a little wave. The gesture seemed to cause quite a stir among his captors. Several of them recoiled, their antennae twitching frantically. The big one made a sharp gesture with what might have been its hand, and suddenly Jake's cell filled with a sound like wind chimes having an argument with a dial-up modem. Then, impossibly, the sound resolved into words he could understand. "Primitive communication acknowledged," the voice said, emerging from everywhere and nowhere. "Subject appears capable of rudimentary linguistic functions. Beginning initial interrogation protocol." Jake looked around for speakers but couldn't see any. The voice seemed to come from the walls themselves, or maybe from inside his own head. Either way was unsettling. "Interrogation," he said. "Hold on there, partner. I think we might be getting ahead of ourselves. How about we start with names? I'm Jake Morrison, and you folks are..." The silence that followed was the kind of quiet that makes you check if your hearing's gone bad. The aliens beyond the walls had gone completely still, like someone had paused a very strange movie. Finally, the voice returned, and now it carried what Jake could swear was confusion. "The subject? Requests identification data? This is not standard primitive behavior. Accessing cultural database." Another pause, longer this time. "Warning. No significant data available on species human from planet designation Terra 3. Recommend caution." "Terra 3? Jake snorted. "We call it Earth, but I guess you folks can call it whatever makes you happy. And I wouldn't call us primitive. We might not have flying chrome cathedrals, but we've got cable TV and microwave burritos, so we're doing all right." This seemed to break something in their collective alien brain. The mantis things started moving again, but now they were moving fast, their gestures sharp and agitated.
Jake caught glimpses of what might have been control panels lighting up beyond his field of view. The subject displays anomalous confidence levels, the voice reported, and now it definitely sounded worried.
Recommending immediate neural analysis. Neural analysis? Jake stood up, brushing off his jeans. Now hold on.
I don't know what that means, but it sounds like the kind of thing a man should be asked about first.
Compliance is not required from test subjects. The voice replied, You are now property of the Zephyrian Empire, acquired through standard colonial acquisition protocols. Your species has been classified as pre-sentient, and therefore has no legal standing under imperial law.
Jake absorbed this information with the same expression he'd worn when his ex-wife announced she was leaving him for her yoga instructor. It was the look of a man who'd been handed bad news before and had learned to roll with it.
Pre-sentient, he repeated slowly. Meaning you think we're too dumb to have rights. Correct. Your neural patterns will be analyzed and recorded for scientific purposes. Your physical form will be dissected to determine biological weaknesses. This data will be used to optimize the conquest of your homeworld. Conquest. Jake nodded thoughtfully. Of Earth. Correct. My Earth. Where my daughter lives. Something had changed in Jake's voice. It was still the same Texas drawl, still conversational and friendly, but underneath it, something else had awakened. Something that had been sleeping since his last tour in Afghanistan. Something that had hoped it might never have to wake up again. Your offspring's survival is not a priority of this operation, the voice said with the casual indifference of someone discussing the weather. Jake Morrison looked up at the curved ceiling of his cell and smiled. It wasn't a nice smile.
It was the smile of a man who'd just been given permission to stop being polite.
Well, he said quietly, that changes things.
The aliens couldn't see him reaching for his boot, where a combat knife he'd carried for 15 years rested in a concealed sheath.
They'd been very thorough about scanning him for weapons, but they'd scanned for energy signatures and exotic materials. They'd never encountered a species that still used sharpened steel.
The mantis creature with the rank insignia moved closer to the cell, probably to get a better look at this fascinatingly primitive specimen. Its compound eyes reflected the soft blue light of the chamber as it studied Jake with scientific detachment.
It never saw the blade coming. Jake's knife punched through whatever exotic material the cell was made of like it was plastic wrap. The alien stumbled backward, green fluid spraying from the gash across its thorax, its multiple arms windmilling in shock. Alarms began screaming. The cell walls flickered and failed as whatever generator powered them went into emergency shutdown. Jake rolled out of the collapsing energy field and came up running, his knife still dripping alien blood.
The chamber beyond was larger than he'd expected, filled with banks of equipment that looked like the offspring of a computer and a pipe organ. More of the mantis aliens were scattered throughout the space, all of them turning toward him with expressions of shock that were unmistakable despite their inhuman faces.
Neural analysis, Jake said conversationally, advancing on the nearest alien with his knife held low and ready. That's a fancy way of saying lobotomy, isn't it? The alien he was approaching made a sound like a tea kettle having a panic attack and reached for what was obviously a weapon on its belt. Jake was faster. The knife found the creature's center of mass, and it dropped without another sound. And dissection, Jake continued, pulling his blade free and looking around for the next threat. You were going to cut me open to see how I work. Two more aliens were moving toward him now, but they were hesitant, uncertain. They'd probably never seen a test subject fight back before. Most species, when faced with the overwhelming technological superiority of the Empire, simply surrendered. They'd never met a Texan. Jake feinted left, then dove right as an energy beam sizzled through the air where he'd been standing.
He rolled behind a bank of controls and came up with an alien communication device he'd snatched from a fallen mantis thing. It looked like a cross between a smartphone and a sea urchin.
And you want to conquer Earth, he said, apparently to himself, though his voice carried clearly through the chamber. My home, where my little girl goes to school every morning. The remaining aliens had taken cover behind their equipment, but Jake could hear them chittering to each other in their own language. They sounded scared. Good. Here's the thing about humans, Jake said, still conversational despite the fact that he was in the middle of a firefight with space bugs. We're persistence predators. You know what that means? An energy blast vaporized the corner of the console he was hiding behind. Jake rolled again, putting more equipment between himself and his attackers. Means we're not the strongest thing on our planet. We're not the fastest, or the most poisonous, or the best camouflaged.
What we are is stubborn. When something threatens our pack, we just
Keep coming. He was moving as he spoke, working his way around the chamber's perimeter. The aliens were trying to track him, but they were used to fighting with long-range weapons against enemies who fought the same way. They weren't prepared for someone who got up close and personal.
Jake came around a bank of equipment and found himself face-to-face with an alien who was frantically trying to reload its weapon. The creature looked up at him with compound eyes that reflected pure terror.
"Boo," Jake said quietly. The knife went in clean and quick. The alien dropped, and Jake relieved it of its weapon. Something that looked like a crystalline tube with too many buttons. He couldn't read the symbols on it, but energy weapons were pretty universal.
point the dangerous end at what you wanted to stop existing. The thing is, he continued, his voice echoing through the chamber as the remaining aliens scrambled for new cover, you folks made 2 mistakes.
First, you decided to mess with Earth. An alien popped up from behind a console, weapon raised. Jake's new toy hummed and sent a bolt of coherent light through its center of mass. The creature crumpled.
Second mistake was bigger, though. Jake was moving again, hunting.
You told me you were going to hurt my daughter. Another alien tried to flank him.
Jake spun and fired without seeming to aim. The bolt took the creature's head clean off. See, I spent 8 years in the army. Did 3 tours in Afghanistan.
Learned a lot of things there, but the most important thing I learned was this. There's nothing in this universe scarier than a parent who thinks their kid is in danger. The last alien was backed into a corner now, its weapon shaking in its multiple hands.
Jake walked toward it slowly, his captured energy weapon held steady. So here's what's going to happen, he said reasonably. You're going to tell me everything about your empire. How many ships? How many soldiers? What kind of weapons? You're going to tell me about your chain of command and your communication systems and your weaknesses. The alien chittered something that the translation system interpreted as, you cannot defeat the Empire. We are millions.
You are one. Jake smiled again, and this time the expression was almost gentle. Partner, I think you're missing the point. I'm not trying to defeat your empire.
He raised the weapon. I'm going to teach it to fear mine. The energy bolt lit up the chamber like lightning. When the afterimage faded, Jake Morrison stood alone among the bodies of his captors, holding an alien weapon and wearing the same expression he'd worn when fixing his truck's transmission. This was just another problem that needed solving.
He looked around the chamber until he found what looked like a communication console. It was covered in symbols he couldn't read, but some things were universal.
Buttons that glowed were usually important. Big red buttons were usually either very good or very bad ideas. So, Jake pressed the big red button. Immediately, the chamber filled with new voices. Dozens of them, all chittering in the alien language. The translation system struggled to keep up, but Jake caught fragments. Attack on research vessel. Multiple casualties. Unknown hostile. Testing. Jake said into what looked like a microphone. This is Jake Morrison of Earth, currently visiting your research vessel uninvited. I just wanted to let y'all know that your boys here were planning some unpleasant things for my home planet. The chittering stopped. I also wanted to let you know, Jake continued pleasantly, that I take that kind of thing personally.
Real personally. So I've got a message for whoever's in charge of this whole operation.
He looked directly into what he hoped was a camera. My name is Jake Morrison. I'm from Earth, United States of America. Great state of Texas. I drive trucks for a living. I served my country for 8 years. And I have a daughter named Sarah, who's 13 years old and wants to be a veterinarian. His voice never changed from its conversational tone, but something in it made the temperature in the room seem to drop. If even one of your ships gets within a light year of my planet, I'm going to take this whole empire apart piece by piece. I'm going to learn how it works, find everyone in charge, and make sure they understand exactly what happens when you threaten a human's family. Jake paused, letting that sink in. Now I know what you're thinking. You're thinking I'm just one man, and you're a whole empire. And you're right. I am just one man. The smile crept back across his face. But I'm an American. And we've had a lot of practice taking apart empires. 3 hours after Jake Morrison declared war on the Zephyrian Empire, Admiral Kethvar was having the worst day of his 1,000-year career. He stood in the command center of the dreadnought Inevitable Triumph, staring at a holographic display that showed 17 red markers where research vessels used to be. 17 ships. Gone. In less than half a rotation of the local star.
Report, he mandated, his 4 primary arms crossed behind his back in the traditional pose of imperial authority. Research Commander Zixtral approached with the careful gait of someone delivering news that might result in their immediate execution.
Admiral, the losses continue to mount. The human-designated Morrison has somehow acquired complete tactical specifications for our research fleet.
How? The word came out as a hiss through Kethvar's breathing slits.
We are uncertain. Our initial intelligence suggested the creature possessed only primitive technology. However, it appears to have rapidly assimilated our computer systems and communication networks.
Kethvar's compound eyes focused on his subordinate with the intensity of a targeting laser. You are telling me that a single primitive managed to outthink our entire research division?
Not outthink, Admiral.
Outfight. The human does not appear to rely on technological superiority. Instead, it demonstrates unprecedented levels of tactical aggression combined with what our Xenop psychologists are classifying as adaptive lethality. Speak plainly. Zixtral activated a holographic display showing the wreckage of Research Vessel 47.
The ship hung dead in space, its hull split open like a dissected specimen. The human infiltrated this vessel using a captured escape pod.
When the crew attempted to repel the intrusion, it utilized their own environmental systems against them. Explain. The creature introduced oxygen into the methane-breathing sections of the ship. Then it created an ignition source. Kethvar stared at the image.
The entire research section of the vessel had been consumed in what must have been a catastrophic explosion. It weaponized atmospheric incompatibility? Yes, Admiral.
Furthermore, before evacuating the vessel, it downloaded the complete personnel files and fleet deployment schedules. This information was then transmitted to other human-infiltrated ships using our own communication network.
Other infiltrated ships? Kethvar's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. The human appears to have liberated other test subjects from our research facilities, creatures from dozens of different worlds, all united under human leadership. They have formed what can only be described as a multi-species insurgency.
The Admiral's breathing slits flared. In all his centuries of service to the Empire, he had never encountered anything like this.
When the Zephyrians conquered a world, they did so through overwhelming technological superiority. Their victims either surrendered immediately or were obliterated from orbit. There was no middle ground,
no extended conflict. This human was creating a middle ground.
Show me the latest transmission, Kethvar ordered.
Bodies of Zephyrian researchers lay scattered across the deck, and the chamber's lighting flickered intermittently. In the center of this carnage stood Jake Morrison, looking no different than he had when first captured. Wearing the same primitive clothing, still holding the same crude blade, but now accompanied by a dozen liberated alien specimens. "This is day 4 of my extended stay in your empire," Jake said to the camera, his tone as conversational as if he were describing the weather. "I wanted to give you folks an update on how things are going." He gestured to his companions, a diverse collection of creatures from across the galaxy, all of whom had been scheduled for dissection or neural analysis. Made some new friends.
Turns out, when you kidnap people and threaten to cut their brains out, they don't really appreciate that. Who would have thought? One of the liberated aliens, a crystalline being that sparkled like living diamond, stepped forward and spoke in a voice like wind chimes. The translation system rendered its words, "The human Morrison has taught us things. How to fight with what we have.
How to make the oppressor's strength become weakness. That's Zara," Jake explained.
"She's from a planet you folks strip-mined about 50 years ago. Turns out her people can resonate at frequencies that really mess with your ship hulls. Amazing what you can learn when you actually talk to folks instead of just cutting them open." Another figure moved into view, something that looked like a cross between a gorilla and a cactus, its hide scarred with old wounds.
"I am Grex of the Bone Fields," it rumbled. "My world died screaming. My children died screaming. Today it is the Zephyrians who scream."
Kethvar's mandibles clicked in agitation. The Empire's xenobiological files contained detailed information on both species.
The crystalline beings had been classified as pacifistic mineral gatherers. The Grex species had been noted as primitive hunter-gatherers with limited intellectual capacity. Seeing them coordinated and militarized was disturbing.
"Now I know what you're thinking," Jay continued, apparently reading the Admiral's thoughts across the void of space. "You're thinking this is just a bunch of primitives making noise.
You've got bigger ships, better weapons, more soldiers. All of that's true." He moved closer to the camera, and Kethvar found himself involuntarily taking a step back from the hologram. "But here's what you don't understand about humans. We don't fight fair. We fight to win. And when someone threatens our home, we get creative. Jake held up a device that made Cathaver's blood run cold. It was a Zephyrian quantum communicator, but it had been modified with components that looked disturbingly familiar. Zara here taught me about harmonic resonance. Grex showed me how your soldier's armor has a weak point right behind the third joint. And your own computers taught me about your command structure. The human smiled, and it was the expression of a predator showing its teeth. Admiral Kethvar, commander of Battle Group 7. Age, 1247 standard years. Home colony, Zephyr Prime, family. 1 consort, 3 offspring, 12 grandlings. Currently aboard the dreadnought Inevitable Triumph. Coordinates. Jake rattled off a string of numbers that made Kethvar's primary heart skip several beats. How? Zixtra whispered. But Kethvar was already moving. Battle stations, the Admiral roared. All ships defensive formation. The human knows our position, but even as his crew scrambled to respond, Jake's voice continued from the hologram. See, the thing about fighting humans is that we learn. Fast. Every mistake you make teaches us something new. Every weapon you use against us becomes a weapon we can use against you. Every tactic you try becomes a tactic we can counter. The transmission cut to external views showing Jake's liberated fleet, if the ragtag collection of stolen research vessels could be called a fleet. They were moving in formation, but it wasn't any formation in the Zephyrian tactical database. It was loose, adaptive, with individual ships weaving between each other in patterns that seemed almost organic. Admiral, his tactical officer reported, the hostile fleet is approaching from Vector 77 Mark 9, but their formation is unusual. How unusual? They appear to be using our own research vessels as mobile weapons platforms, but they have modified the science equipment into... The officer paused, checking his readings. Into improvised weapons I do not recognize. On the display, one of the stolen research ships fired something at a Zephyrian patrol vessel. The projectile looked like nothing more than a modified sensor probe, but when it struck the patrol ship's shields, the entire defensive grid collapsed instantly. What was that? Kethvar demanded. Unknown, Admiral. The projectile appears to have been a standard Type 7 sensor probe, but modified to emit a resonance frequency that precisely matched the harmonic vulnerable frequency of our shield generators. How could they know our shield frequencies? The resonance frequency was transmitted by the crystalline being we observed in the transmission. It appears to be generating these frequencies naturally. Kethvar watched in growing horror as Jake's makeshift fleet systematically dismantled his patrol ships. Each attack was different, creative, using captured Zephyrian technology in ways that violated every principle of proper engineering. It was chaos. It was improvisation. It was working. All ships open fire, he commanded. Full barrage. Obliterate them. The Inevitable Triumph and its escort vessels unleashed enough firepower to crack a moon. Energy beams and quantum torpedoes filled the void between the fleets, a light show that could be seen from 3 star systems away. When the energy storm cleared, Jake's fleet was still there, but now they were inside the Zephyrian formation, weaving between the larger ships like fighters in a dogfight. How? Kethvar whispered. His answer came in the form of another transmission. Jake's face appeared on screen again, but now the image was shaking as if the camera was being carried by someone running. That's a hell of a light show, Jake said, apparently unimpressed by having just survived enough firepower to sterilize a continent. But you know what I learned in Afghanistan. Big explosions are scary until you figure out how to avoid them. The camera turned, showing the interior of whatever ship Jake was aboard. It was cramped, cobbled together from parts of multiple vessels, and filled with alien beings working frantically at stations that looked like they'd been built by someone who'd never seen proper engineering blueprints. Meet my engineering team, Jake said proudly. Turns out, when you grab folks from 100 different worlds, you get 100 different perspectives on how physics is supposed to work. One of the aliens at the engineering stations looked up, a creature that resembled a sentient octopus with too many tentacles. It spoke in a language that sounded like equations being solved at high speed. That's calc, Jake translated. He's from a world where mathematics is art. He figured out that your quantum torpedoes follow predictable trajectory algorithms. Once you know the algorithm, on screen Kethvar watched a quantum torpedo. His quantum torpedo curve away from Jake's ship and slam into one of the Admiral's own escort vessels. You can make them go wherever you want them to go. Jake finished. Kethvar's compound eyes tracked the tactical display in disbelief. Somehow, impossibly, this ragtag collection of primitives was turning the Empire's own weapons against it. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was that they were winning. Admiral, his communications officer reported, we are receiving surrender requests from battle groups 3, 9, and 15.
The human fleet has disabled their primary systems and is offering to spare their crews in exchange for technological specifications. Surrender requests? Kethvar's voice cracked.
Our ships are surrendering to research specimens? Yes, Admiral. Furthermore, the human has been broadcasting on all frequencies. Our preliminary analysis suggests his transmissions have reached approximately 40% of Imperial space. Broadcasting what? The communications officer activated the ship's main display, and Jake Morrison's voice filled the command center. People of the galaxy, this is Jake Morrison of Earth. I'm sure most of you folks don't know who humans are. And that's fine. We're new around here. But I wanted you to know that the Zephyrian Empire has been telling you lies. The transmission showed Jake standing in what looked like a captured Imperial archive, surrounded by holographic displays showing worlds being conquered, species being enslaved, entire civilizations being reduced to test subjects.
What they really bring is death. They tell you they're superior.
What they really are is bullies.
And I've got some experience with bullies. Jake's expression hardened. The thing about bullies is they're only tough when they think they can't be touched. But every bully can be touched, every empire can fall.
And every tyrant can bleed. He gestured to the displays around him. These are the files from just one Imperial research facility. Records of 10,000 worlds, 1 million species. 1.
Billions of individuals who were kidnapped, experimented on, and murdered in the name of Imperial science. The camera zoomed in on specific files. Children taken from their families. Sentient beings treated as laboratory equipment. Entire populations used as test subjects for biological weapons.
But here's the thing, Jake continued, his voice gaining intensity. Every species they captured and studied taught them something.
Every world they conquered gave them new knowledge. Every experiment they performed made them stronger. He smiled again, but this time it wasn't the expression of a predator. It was something worse. It was the expression of someone who just figured out how to win. What they didn't realize is that they were teaching us too. Every file I've read, every computer I've accessed, every ship I've captured has taught me more about how their empire works. And you know what I've learned? Jake leaned closer to the camera. It's all connected. Every ship, every station, every world in their empire is linked through their quantum communication network. One network spanning half the galaxy, carrying every order, every piece of data, every secret they have. Kethvar felt his primary heart stop, and I'd just figured out how to hack it. The transmission cut to black. Then slowly, every screen in the Imperial Command Center began displaying the same message, over and over, in every language known to the Empire. This is Jake Morrison of Earth. Your empire ends today.
The fall of the Zephyrian Empire began at 1427 Galactic Standard Time, on what would later be called Liberation Day. It began when Jake Morrison, a truck driver from Texas who had never seen a computer more complex than his smartphone, sent a single command through the Empire's own quantum communication network.
That command was elegant in its simplicity. Tell the truth. Across 10,000 star systems on 1 million worlds, every Imperial communication device began broadcasting the same message. Not Jake's words, but the Empire's own records. Centuries of classified documents. Detailed accounts of genocides, mass kidnappings, biological experiments performed on children.
The true casualty figures from their peaceful annexations. The real purposes behind their scientific research. Within an hour, the rebellion had begun. Admiral Kethvar watched his empire burn from the command deck of the inevitable triumph, and for the first time in his 1,000-year life he felt something he'd never experienced before. Terror.
Not of death. Death was an acceptable risk in service to the Empire. Terror of irrelevance. Terror of watching everything he'd served crumble because they'd underestimated a single primitive. Status report, he commanded, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer.
Admiral, his communications officer replied, his voice hollow with shock. We have lost contact with 73% of Imperial space. The remaining sectors are reporting widespread civil uprising.
Fleet elements are defecting at an exponential rate. How many ships remain loyal?
Unknown, sir.
The quantum network has been compromised to the extent that we cannot distinguish between accurate reports and human propaganda. On the main display, images flickered past like a nightmare slideshow.
Zephyrian colonies evacuating under fire from their own former slaves.
Imperial garrison forces laying down their arms as liberated populations rose against them. Research facilities exploding as their test subjects broke free and destroyed the machinery of oppression. And through it all, Jake Morrison's voice, calm and conversational, narrating the end of an empire.
Now I know what you're thinking, Jake said from whatever ship he'd made his mobile command center.
You're thinking this is revenge. That I'm doing this because you folks picked on the wrong human.
The display showed Jake surrounded by beings from across the galaxy. His liberation fleet had grown from a dozen stolen research vessels to hundreds of ships crewed by former Imperial slaves. They worked together with an efficiency that violated everything the Zephyrians believed about inferior species.
But that's not what this is about, Jake continued. This isn't about revenge. This is about justice. And there's a difference. He gestured to a holographic display showing the liberation of Research Station Omega 7. Kethvar recognized the facility. It was where the Empire conducted its most sensitive experiments on sentient beings. As he watched, explosions rippled through the station's core as liberated test subjects systematically destroyed every piece of research equipment. Revenge is about making someone pay for what they did to you, Jake explained.
Justice is about making sure they can never do it to anyone else. The camera followed Jake as he walked through the corridors of what had been an Imperial dreadnought, now flying under the banner of the Liberation Fleet. The walls were lined with beings of every conceivable description, all working together with a coordination that should have been impossible.
See, the thing about empires, Jake said, is they're only as strong as the people willing to serve them. And your empire just learned something important about people. He stopped in front of a massive holographic display showing the entire galaxy. Imperial territories were marked in red, but even as they watched, the red markers were going dark by the hundreds.
When you treat people like things, eventually they stop thinking of you as people too. Kethvar's tactical officer looked up from his console with an expression of barely controlled panic. Admiral, we're receiving a direct communication request from the human. Put him through, Kethvar said.
He was curious to hear what this primitive had to say when offered the chance to gloat. Jake's image appeared on the main screen, life-sized and clear. He was sitting in what looked like a command chair, but one that had been obviously modified to accommodate someone used to Earth-normal gravity. Behind him, aliens of every description worked at stations that looked like they'd been cobbled together from a dozen different technologies. Admiral Kethvar, Jake said with a polite nod. I appreciate you taking my call. What do you want, human? Kethvar managed to keep his voice steady despite the rage building in his chest.
I want to offer you a choice, Jake replied. See, right now you've got maybe 6 hours before your remaining loyal forces finish reading the files I've been broadcasting.
After that, you're going to be in command of exactly 0 ships and 0 soldiers. Even if that were true, what makes you think I would surrender to a primitive? Jake's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind his eyes,
something that reminded Kethvar of the hunting beasts from his homeworld.
Because I'm not asking you to surrender to me, Jake said quietly.
I'm asking you to surrender to them. The display behind Jake shifted, showing feeds from across the former empire. Liberated slaves building new homes on worlds that had been strip-mined. Former research subjects helping to evacuate Imperial civilian populations ahead of advancing rebellion forces. Children playing in streets that had been cleared of Imperial surveillance equipment. Every being your empire captured, every world you conquered, every species you enslaved, they all want justice. But they're willing to settle for you leaving and never coming back. Kethvar's mandibles clicked in confusion. You would let us go? After everything we've done? I would let you learn, Jake corrected.
See, the thing about humans is, we believe in second chances, not because we're soft, but because we know people can change, even people who've done terrible things. The display showed Imperial vessels limping away from rebel-controlled space, their crews evacuated to neutral worlds. No pursuit, no revenge killings, just exile. Your empire is done, Jake continued. That's not negotiable. But your people don't have to be. You can take your remaining ships, find some empty corner of the galaxy and start over. Build something better. Something that doesn't require stepping on everyone else to feel tall. And if we refuse? Kethvar asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. Jake's smile was thin and cold. Then I'll show you what revenge looks like instead of justice. And Admiral, I promise you don't want that. Because I've learned a lot about your empire in the past week. I know where every one of your ships is hiding. I know the locations of your secret bases. I know which worlds your families live on. The human leaned forward in his chair. I know where Zephyr Prime is. The command center went dead silent. Zephyr Prime was the Empire's birth world, the home of every Zephyrian bloodline worth mentioning.
Its location was one of the most closely guarded secrets in Imperial space. How? Kethvar whispered.
You folks were very thorough about documenting everything, Jake replied, including the personal files of your command staff. Birthplaces, family trees, vacation home coordinates. All very useful information for someone planning a war.
He paused, letting that sink in. But I don't want to plan a war, Admiral. I want to end one, so I'm giving you 6 hours to make a choice. Take your ships and go, or I'll make sure the only thing left of your empire is a very cautionary tale. The transmission cut out. Kefar stared at the empty screen for a long moment, his mind racing through possibilities. He could fight. The inevitable Triumph was still the most powerful warship in known space. He could take it to Zephyr Prime, rally the home fleets, make a stand that would be remembered for millennia. But as he ran the calculations, he realized something that made his blood run cold. The human wasn't bluffing. The rebellion had access to Imperial intelligence networks, Imperial ship specifications, Imperial personnel files. They knew everything. More importantly, they demonstrated an aptitude for improvisation that defied every military doctrine in the Zephyrian database. Fighting them wasn't just hopeless, it would be suicide. Admiral? His tactical officer asked quietly. Your orders? Kefar looked around his command center at the officers who had served him faithfully for decades. Good soldiers who deserved better than to die for an empire that had already fallen. Signal all remaining ships, he said finally. We are withdrawing from Imperial space. Sir? You heard me. Full withdrawal. We're going home. As the news spread through the ship, Kefar found himself thinking about something the human had said. About second chances. About building something better. Maybe after 1,000 years of conquest, it was time to try something different. 3 months later, Jake Morrison stood on the observation deck of the Liberation Fleet flagship, looking out at what had once been Imperial space. The ship around him was still a patchwork of technologies from a dozen different worlds. But it worked. More than that, it worked, because every being aboard it had chosen to make it work. The reconstruction is proceeding ahead of schedule, reported Zara, the crystalline being who had become his unofficial second-in-command. Her voice chimed like wind through crystal formations. The former research worlds had been successfully returned to their original populations. And the Imperial refugees? Jake asked. Being integrated into neutral colonies as requested, Admiral Kefar has been true to his word. No Imperial ship has been detected in liberated space since the withdrawal. Jake nodded, satisfied. He'd been worried that some of the Zephyrian commanders might try to continue the fight, but apparently they'd learned their lesson. Sometimes the threat of overwhelming retaliation was more effective than retaliation itself. There is one matter requiring your attention, Zara continued. The Galactic Council has formally requested your presence at their emergency session next month. They want to make the Liberation Fleet official, right? More than that, they want to offer you supreme command of the new Galactic Defense Force. Jake snorted. Tell them thanks, but no thanks. I'm a truck driver, not a general. Jake, said a new voice behind him. He turned to see Grex, the scarred warrior whose people had been among the first liberated by the fleet. You may think yourself merely a driver of vehicles, but you have united more worlds than any conqueror in galactic history. I didn't unite anything, Jake replied. I just gave people a chance to unite themselves. Nevertheless, Zara chimed, your refusal presents a problem. Without central leadership, the coalition may fragment. Old grievances between species may resurface. Jake sighed. This was the part of liberation that nobody talked about in the movies. It was one thing to tear down an empire. Building something better in its place was the real challenge. Okay, he said finally. I'll make them a deal. I'll stick around long enough to help set up a proper government, something democratic, with representatives from every member world. But I'm not becoming anyone's emperor. The galaxy's had enough of those. And then? Grex asked. Jake looked out at the stars, thinking of home. Of Earth, where his daughter was probably worried sick about her father who disappeared while driving a truck. Of Texas, where the morning coffee was better and the people made sense. Then I'm going home, he said. I've got a delivery to finish.
You would abandon the galaxy? Zara asked, surprised.
I'm not abandoning anything, Jake replied with a smile. I'm teaching it to take care of itself. That's what freedom means. Not needing someone else to tell you what to do. He turned away from the stars and headed toward the ship's communication center. Besides, he added, I promised my daughter I'd be home for her birthday, and Jake Morrison always keeps his promises. As he walked through the corridors of the flagship, Jake passed beings from 100 different worlds all working together to build something new, something better. Something that didn't require anyone to kneel. It wasn't perfect. There would be problems, conflicts, disagreements. That was how democracy worked. Messy and loud and sometimes inefficient, but ultimately more resilient than any empire. Because empires, Jake had learned, were only as strong as their weakest link. But a community, a real community built on mutual respect and shared purpose, was as strong as its strongest members.
And Jake Morrison had helped forge a community that spanned the galaxy. Not bad for a Tuesday morning's work.
6 months later, the Galactic Council received a transmission from a small blue-green planet in an unremarkable star system on the edge of known space. The message was brief. "This is Jake Morrison of Earth. Just wanted to let y'all know that my delivery got through just fine. My daughter loved her birthday present, a crystal sculpture made by my friend Zara. She's thinking about studying xenobiology now, maybe becoming a diplomat. The new government seems to be working out okay. Democracy's messier than empire, but it's a lot more fun. Keep in touch and remember, treat people like people, not things. Oh, and if anyone ever threatens my planet again, you know where to find me. Jake Morrison, signing off." The transmission ended with what sounded like country music playing in the background and a voice calling, "Dad, dinner's ready." The council filed the message in their permanent archives under a new classification they'd created specifically for humanity: handle with extreme caution.
Surprisingly dangerous when provoked. And in the footnotes added by some council clerk with a sense of humor. Note, humans apparently consider family dinner more important than galactic conquest.
This may explain everything. The Galactic Empire captured one human. Too late they learned he was American.